going. There we go. Social studies today. I need eyes forward. I need you listening. We got a couple of things we need to do today. Okay, you watched on Tuesday, I believe, a primary source and secondary source vocabulary. Okay, I didn't take a grade on that one because it was the first time kind of introducing you to that. So I want to kind of refresh your memory. What was the difference between primary and secondary sources? Who can tell me? Maya? Okay, yeah. Right. So primary source is somebody who was primarily there. They were at that particular event. They witnessed it. They saw it. Maybe they were involved in some way. Okay, that's primary source. A secondary source, which would be Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is not the best place to go.
Exactly.
Secondary source is where maybe gentlemen, boys, we're being rude right now. Secondary source is where I might take information from somebody who was there and recreate it or rewrite it in my own terms. Okay? So a primary source could be like an artifact, not an artifact, but like an actual piece from that you might have an arrowhead, right, that you found or somebody gave you that was discovered. Okay, that would be a primary source. If it's something I replicated and made, then it's a secondary source. This social studies textbook, primary or secondary? Secondary, right? This is information somebody gathered to give to you. Within the social studies book, there are primary sources because they're using their words or they're taking from somebody's dialogue, okay? Most of the pictures are going to be secondary, okay? Some of those photographs are representing what it would look like, okay? Question, Nick?
Like if say someone on like Twitter or something, they posted something saying something, would that be a primary?
So you're saying, like, for instance, President Trump posts on Twitter all the time, right?
Yeah, and he says something about
Right, so if you were taking that would be a primary source because those are his words, that was him saying it. Okay, that would be a primary source if you're looking at that. Okay, but if I were taking his words and maybe restating them or putting them in something or rewording it and it was coming from me in a different way, then it would be secondary. Okay, if I was commenting about it. But his actual Twitter posts and Instagram or wherever else he posts, those would all be primary. Always Twitter. Okay, so those would be primary sources then. Okay, Sean?
What about, like, someone sees something and texts it to someone else, and someone sees that and texts it to someone else, and so on and so on?
Well, it's just the primary source that's being continually moved.
Even though it went through, like, 500 people?
And only if you're changing it and rewording it or reconfiguring it. If it's actual words and the actual information, then it would be primary.
it's like Chinese.
Okay, it came from the person that was involved or that wrote it. Okay, yeah, kind of like Chinese telephone. Let's look here a little more. So if you go into your iPad, Social Studies Chapter 4, I have added Primary and Secondary Sources PDF. So we can look at that. I'm going to pull it up here on my screen. So if you're watching the video, you can see it here. So here, we're going to compare primary and secondary sources. Why it matters. To know what really happened in the past, you need to find evidence. You can do this by studying and comparing primary and secondary sources. All right. Learn. Primary sources are the records and artifacts made by people who saw or took part in an event. Okay, records or artifacts. So records meaning nowadays the Twitter, or maybe they wrote a book about themselves. Okay, those kinds of things would be records, something that was written. These people may have written down their thoughts in a journal, a letter, or a poem. They may have taken a photograph or painted a picture. A primary source gives people of today a direct link to the past event. Okay, so there's nobody in between. Okay? Those Twitter posts are coming from him and going to somebody else. Okay, there's nothing in between that's maybe changing them or altering them in some way. Hands down right now. Secondary source is a record of an event made by someone who was not there at the time. So if I were to make maybe a timeline of what happened during the elections and the campaigns, was I there? No, I was not there. I would be gathering information from different resources to create this. If President Trump created a timeline for us and gave it to us, primary or secondary?
Primary.
Primary, right? So we would know from him, or maybe Joe Biden would do one for us and give us a timeline. That would be primary. It was coming from the source that was actually there. If I do it, I'm gathering information. I wasn't there, I didn't experience it, okay? If someone, let's see, it is not a direct link to an event. If someone who only heard or read about an event writes a newspaper story or a book, that is a secondary source. So that would be me. I was reading the information, I'm gathering information, and I'm creating something else. Okay? Sometimes a source can be either primary or secondary. A newspaper story written by a reporter who saw an event is a primary source. So reporters can come up on things, right, and they can be there and actually see what's happening. They would then become primary. But if I'm interviewing somebody, right, let's say I'm a reporter, Riker, I go to this scene and I'm just interviewing people after it's already happened, now I'm a secondary source. If I was there while it was happening, I'm a primary source.
Like those are the people on the news, they come and talk to people after like in 9/11, they come to
Yeah.
people and ask them like what happened.
Yeah, so they ask them, you know, what did you see? What did you experience? That reporter is gathering information on their secondary. There were some reporters that were there when it happened and experienced it themselves, so now they're a primary source. Sometimes a source can be either primary or secondary. I read that. Where am I at here? A newspaper story written by a reporter who heard about the event from an eyewitness is a secondary source. Okay? So, if that person was there and it came directly from that person who experienced the event, then it's primary. Hang on. Well, let's look at these down here. I'll take questions in a few minutes. Let's look at this down here. Okay, they've got some examples there of different things. So this is a Jamestown website. That's over here, this letter D. The photograph of reenactors making a dugout canoe. If they're reenacting this, primary or secondary? Secondary, because they're acting it, right? They're recreating something that may have happened. And this recent book about Jamestown. So these are all secondary sources. Okay? Somebody collected information and wrote it. Somebody gathered information and put it on a website. All secondary resources. All right. Sean, question.
What does this have to do with social studies?
How do we get social studies?
What?
Books, collecting sources, right? So you need to know, are they primary? Are they legitimate things that somebody experienced and I can trust their information? Or are they secondary? Maybe I need to look a little deeper and find more evidence, right? Because a primary source is going to be more truthful, right? It's coming from that person. A secondary source, and we talked about Wikipedia, I can go in and add things to Wikipedia, right? But does that mean I know exactly what happened? Does that make it true? No, it doesn't. So if you have you have to have a lot of secondary sources to kind of check and double check. Okay, primary sources, maybe you don't need as many. Okay, Nick, question? Good?
No.
Go ahead.
Down here it says the Jamestown.
Down here? Uh-huh.
It says 1994 to 2000.
Where are you looking at? Oh, here?
On the book, but wasn't it like really way earlier than that?
It was, but this is rediscovered. So they're looking at Jamestown maybe during this time as opposed to back when it first. Yeah. How did it change? Because they are going to change, right? Colonies, cities change all the time. All right, let's look up here at these primary sources. Let's see, this title page of a book by John Smith. So John Smith wrote this. We know he was there, right? He experienced these things. Coins found at Jamestown. So these are actual coins, artifacts from Jamestown. And John White's drawing of an Algonquin Indian are primary sources. How come John White's drawing is a primary source? If I were to draw that same thing, it wouldn't be primary. Why is his? Adam?
Because he was there.
Right, he was there. I wasn't. I'm just taking the information from what he did. Okay? So that's our differences. Sean?
Would it be primary if he drew it the exact same way and made it look exactly the same?
Nope.
No,
Because I wasn't there. I wasn't seeing it physically like he was. Okay? If I were to draw a picture of you and say this is Sean Kenning on this day, then I would be a primary source. Okay? But if I were to copy his, it's still secondary. It's second, right? This is the first one. This is the first initial photograph, and then I'm making a second copy of it. So you can look at it that way. Primary is first. It's the first original copy. The secondary one is the second copy. Okay? Brendan.
So it's technically like, say, Riker actually drew that picture,
Mm-hmm.
and I copied it off him. That's a secondary.
Plagiarism.
Right. So Riker was there and drew this and saw, yeah, that would be primary. And then if you copied it into the second copy, it would be secondary. Yes.
Wait, that'd be plagiarism though.
Kind of, but you would have to give them credit, right?
Yeah, give me credit.
Okay, you'd have to credit that person, and then it wouldn't be. Eli?
So, was that picture taken or drawn?
Drawn. It says it was a drawing of an Algonquin. John White drew this Algonquin Indian.
So, does it technically mean that he's a model from the 1900s or 1800s?
Yeah, that was probably an Algonquin Indian that he really did see, and he sketched it out, and
He's
here it is.
probably a model. He's probably like $1 million model.
I don't know about that. All right. Let's see here. You have, let me get out of this. You can use this if you need to go back to that vocabulary. You should be able to get back to it in past assignments. I don't think that I closed it up or did anything to it. It should still be there because that'll give you some helpful information to complete this primary, secondary resources worksheet. So that's your social studies homework. If it doesn't get done, it can go home and get checked or however you want to do it.
There's 4 questions.
However, Sean, first, we're not starting. iPads face down. For those of you in here, I need you up here looking. And those of you listening, I need you listening very carefully because I'm going to give you some important information, Riker. Are you ready? First, you're going to take this quiz, 4-1 and 4-2 quiz. Okay, you can use your notes. If you have notes, you can use your notes. So I would get my social studies notebook out.
That's probably a good idea.
And then you need to take your time. I should not see, when I click on this, it tells me how long you've been on there. It tells me from the time you started it to the time you submitted it. If it was 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 10 minutes, I should not see anything that tells me it was only 2 minutes.
What if it was like 5?
Let's look and see how many questions here. Oh, well, there's 9 questions. This one is matching. So you should probably take, I would say, at least 15 minutes because I'm going to spend some time looking them up, right? Because I'm probably not going to know all of them and I get to use my notes, so I'm going to double check. Taking those 15 minutes is the difference between an A or a B. Even though you're checking and double checking a B, there's nothing wrong with a B, missing 1 or 2,
I would love to.
okay?
Yeah, these are
So
pretty good.
taking your time, using the 15, 20 minutes and my notes is the difference between an A and a B, A or a B, and an F. If I hurry up and spend 2 minutes on it, what's going to happen?
You're gonna have
More than likely, because just typing things in, unless you're extra lucky today, probably is not going to give you an A or a B.
That's probably like a 2%.
Okay, I am giving you plenty of time. Okay, you have plenty of time. Use your notes, take your time. Quiz first, that has to get submitted. And then you're going to work on the primary, secondary worksheet. Same thing with that. Take your time. Use the book, the information. Okay, questions on what you're doing for social studies. Quiz, primary, secondary resource worksheet. All right, you're working.